So we've been covering the very, very sudden pivot of Mark Zuckerberg this last week or so. Well, the Joe Rogan podcast had him as a guest, and the podcast account tweeted out a very feel-good message here. The good old U.S. of A. is coming together. Trump just wants America to win, and Mark Zuckerberg is on board. So once again, folks, as a point of policy, we have audio only from the Joe Rogan show, since we know they're really struggling to keep the lights on over there, and they like to copyright claim video content, so we're going to use the audio. So here's the audio from this.
Like, I don't want to come across as if, like, we don't have things that we need to do better. Obviously, we do. And when we mess something up, we deserve to be held accountable for that, and just like everyone else. I do think that the American technology industry is a bright spot in the American economy. I think it's a strategic advantage for the United States that we have a lot of the strongest companies in the world. And I think it should be part of the U.S.'s strategy going forward to defend that. And it's one of the things that I'm optimistic about with President Trump is I think he just wants America to win.
That's right. President Trump, he just wants America to win. He just wants America to win. Very sudden change of tune here.
And by America, he means Israel.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the New York Times put out a big piece here detailing some perhaps lesser-known nuggets of information regarding this very sudden Zuckerberg pivot. Inside Mark Zuckerberg's sprint to remake Meta for the Trump era. Mark Zuckerberg kept the circle of people who knew his thinking small. Last month, Mr. Zuckerberg, the chief executive of Meta, tapped a handful of top policy and communications executives and others to discuss the company's approach to online speech. He had decided to make sweeping changes after visiting President-elect Donald J. Trump at Mar-a-Lago over Thanksgiving. Now he needed his employees to turn those changes into policy. The entire process was highly unusual. Meta typically alters policies that govern its apps, which include Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Threads, by inviting employees, civic leaders, and others to weigh in. Any shifts generally take months, but Mr. Zuckerberg turned this latest effort into a closely held 6-week sprint, blindsiding even employees on his policy and integrity teams. On Tuesday, most of Meta's 72,000 employees learned of Mr. Zuckerberg's plans along with the rest of the world. The Silicon Valley giant said it was overhauling speech on its apps by loosening restrictions on how people can talk about contentious social issues such as immigration, gender, and sexuality. It killed its fact-checking program that had been aimed at curbing misinformation and said it would instead rely on users to police falsehoods, like a community note system like X has. And it said it would insert more political content into people's feeds after previously de-emphasizing that very material. On Friday, Meta's makeover continued when the company told employees that it would end its work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's right. So they're folding their DEI department, if you will. It eliminated its chief diversity officer role, ended its diversity hiring goals that called for the employment of a certain number of women and minorities, and said it would no longer prioritize minority-owned businesses when hiring vendors. Meta planned to focus on how to apply fair and consistent practices that mitigate bias for all, no matter your background, Janelle Gale, Vice President of Human Resources, said in an internal post that was relayed to the New York Times. At Meta, Mr. Zuckerberg began preparing to change speech policies. The group worked on revising Meta's hate speech policy, with Mr. Zuckerberg leading the charge, they said. They changed the name of the policy, which lays out to what to do with slurs, threats against protected groups, and other harmful content on its apps, to hateful conduct. That effectively shifted the emphasis of rules away from speech, minimizing Meta's role in policing online conversation. Okay, so that is may seem like a subtle distinction there between hate speech and hateful conduct, but it is an important one, right? Hate speech is a politically charged term. It can mean whatever a certain political cohort wants it to mean if they have enough power to impose their will in that way. Conduct is different. Conduct is actionable, right? Threatening somebody, explicitly slurring somebody, right? Those are actually against rules even on free speech platforms. Like even Rumble does not allow explicit racial slurs to be directed at specific people, since that crosses the realm from
Except
speech
us.
into conduct. Right, yeah, exactly. So there's a difference there between speech and conduct, and they made that known in their new speech policies. On Tuesday, Mr. Zuckerberg made the new speech policies public in his Instagram video. We featured that in its entirety on our show this past week. Mr. Kaplan appeared on Fox and Friends, one of his right-hand men there, a mainstay of Mr. Trump's media diet, saying Meta's fact-checking partners had too much political bias. The company also removed the transgender and non-binary themes on its Messenger chat app, which allows users to customize the app's colors and wallpaper, two employees said. The change was reported earlier by 404 Media. That same day at Meta's offices in Silicon Valley, Texas, and New York, facilities managers were instructed to remove tampons from men's bathrooms, which the company had provided for non-binary and transgender employees who use the men's room and who may have required sanitary pads, two employees said. Not only that, they checked the papers of the janitors they sent in to take the tampons out. Hey, by the way, how'd you get here? How'd you get here? No, they did not do that. My editorial. But
Habla inglés.
Yeah. This just keeps...
Tampons removal.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. This just keeps getting funnier and funnier. So also in that Rogan interview, this was picked up by Bloomberg, Zuckerberg says most companies need more masculine energy.
There's just something, the kind of masculine energy, I think, is good. And obviously, society has plenty of that, but I think corporate culture was really like trying to get away from it. And I do think that there's just something, it's like, I don't know, all these forms of energy are good. And I think having a culture that like celebrates the aggression a bit more has its own merits that are really positive. And that has been a kind of a positive experience for me.
I used to make my male employees pee sitting down. Now I allow them to stand up.
We are in the metaverse. We will have specific rooms set aside for soy boys, but we don't want them in the general population.
That's right. That's right. We want to filter them out.
Just like having a thing that I can just like do with my guy friends and like, and it's just like, we're just like beat each other a bit. I don't know. It's good.
It is good.
Yeah,
I agree.
I don't know.
I tell my wife now, if dinner's not ready, when I get home, you're going to get a smack. And she understands that. She understands there's been a cultural shift. And she's fine with that now, as she should be.
My friend
This is the new
from
me.
College, we had drinks the other day. He didn't want to give me a reach around. I smacked him around the whole my whole $1 billion ranch.
That's right. He didn't stop there. Zuckerberg calls for repopulation of cultural elite class. That's right. Here you go again.
It's not just the government that has power. There's like certain people who are in these like culturally elite positions, and journalists, TV news anchors, like who are the people who people broadly trust. But I think that this is like a very big sea change in terms of like who are the voices that matter. And what we do is we try to build a platform that gives people a voice. But I think that there's this wholesale generational shift in who are the people who are being listened to. And I think that that's like a very fascinating thing that is going on, because I think that that's like what's going on here. It's not just the government and people saying, hey, we want like a very big change here. I think it's just like a wholesale shift in saying we just want different people who we actually trust,
right?
Who are actually going to like tell us the truth and not give us like the bullshit opinions that you're supposed to say, but like the type of stuff that I would actually like when I'm sitting in my living room with my friends, like the stuff that we know is true. Like who are the people who kind of have the courage to actually just say that stuff? I don't know. I think that whole like cultural elite class needs to get repopulated with people who people actually trust.
And finally, The Onion had some reporting on this. Mark Zuckerberg defends decision to fly Confederate flag at Facebook headquarters. Still got it. They could still fire off a good one.
On occasion.
every now and then. Yeah, I mean, wow. Wow. We thought it was a big deal when we covered those speech changes. Now you see, yeah, we need a new cultural elite class of podcasters who people trust to replace mainstream media. We need
That's the
less
one thing. That's the
censorship.
one thing I agree with. I do agree that podcasters should be the new elite class.
Yeah, right. We are the new elite class. We
Yes.
deserve our day in the sun as the new
Yes.
elite class.
I'm glad he
Yes.
acknowledged that.
The new vanguard of taste, right? Yes, absolutely. But I mean, you add that to we need more masculinity in corporate culture, no tampons in the bathrooms anymore, no DEI. I mean, it did not take him long to just completely flip, which is what I always said about these tech people. Their ethos, his specifically, at Facebook, made the phrase famous, move fast, break things. That became a sort of one-size-fits-all motto for all of tech. They don't like to work. They don't like to be bothered, right? DEI is a bother to corporate America. They'd rather not do it. It's a pain in the ass, right? It's effort. It doesn't pay. They have DEI programs because they think that raises their ESG score. They think that keeps them in the good graces of people with power, and assuming that Democrats in power have won the popular vote, they assume the culture, at the very least, the sort of PMC crust of the culture that empowered the current government likes that, and so they'll do it to sort of keep people off their ass. That's all they care about. They want people off their ass. They want to be left alone and work as little as possible. So as soon as he said there's been a cultural shift, that was his cue to just turn on a dime, and all of a sudden, all of this bullshit that big tech was insisting was so important for years and years and years, all of a sudden, that's out the window. That's out the window. And the big difference this time is that Trump won the popular vote, and he won it despite the onslaught that was in his way, trying to keep him out of the White House again. Notice they didn't really do this shit during Trump's first term because Trump lost the popular vote. And there was all this speculation about, well, did he only win because of the Russians, right? Now there's none of that. Now there's been a broad-based defeat of the kinds of people that guys like Zuckerberg were trying to make happy for all these years. They never really wanted to. This has always been who he was, right? This isn't so much a reversal. The reversal was before. It's just mask off. He had to put a mask on for 7 or 8 years when people were on his ass. And now that he senses they're not going to be on his ass anymore, of course, he's just going to let his MAGA flag fly. Not because he's MAGA, but because MAGA's in power and they'll leave him the fuck alone if he does what he wants. And so he'll just do it that way because it's easier.
Yeah. All right. This was kind of building a lot of companies over the last year as they saw the political wind shifting, started to eliminate their DEI programs. This is what I have been screaming for years, since before we had a show, but particularly for as long as we've had a show. A lot of the people who took this stuff up were well-intentioned, naive, but well-intentioned. And I kept screaming from the top of my lungs. This whole ideology is so disgusting and so distasteful and so undermining to the goals it claims to care about, because really it's just a big grift. There are many different components to this. Once you achieve what is your goal, like gay marriage, well, what do you think's going to happen? GLAAD is just going to, everybody who's making a living off GLAAD is just going to pack up and go home and get a job in the general workforce? Or no, they have to find something else to get people outraged about. I think that's part of why sexuality being sold as a lifestyle in more and more extreme ways became part of the conversation. I think these groups used it to fundraise. You know, I think eventually it got into children because, of course, you're going to get enormous backlash, and then you got a certain liberal class that will go along with anything. And you just, yeah, this is terrible that they don't want their children at drag shows with strippers. That's horrible. It became a fundraising thing. In academia, at the end of the Cold War, when they abandoned Marxism, when they abandoned an economic theory of society, they had to justify their own existence, which again, so much of this was just a make work project for PMCs, latching onto this postmodernist ideology. How do you justify your job at the university if you have no theory? Well, if you can't be a Marxist academic anymore, well, then you're going to be a woke one, right? So you have a lot of components to this. Now, I would really recommend Anand Giridharadas, as Libby as he might be. His book, Winners Take All, is a very rare behind-the-curtain view into a lot of these billionaires who you've tended to focus on. They don't give a shit. And you're right.
Well, in tech, when it comes to tech, yeah, especially.
You're right about a lot of them.
Yeah.
Not all of them. Remember, elite classes like to feel morally virtuous. They particularly like to feel morally virtuous in ways that set them above the peasants, right? Now, this being a secular age, they can't do that by donating money to build a church, by showing off their piety, right? I mean, they are showing off their piety, but within a secular religion. The ESG scores for a lot of these people was a way of trying to demonstrate corporate virtue without messing with the system, without actually messing with economics. That's the running theme through all of this. You have a lot of self-interested people from PMCs trying to create jobs in an environment of elite overproduction for their children and for themselves. You have these not-for-profits that once society pretty much progressed beyond a lot of the worst kind of homophobia and racism, had to find ever more exotic outrages to get people to donate money for. You have that element of it. And then you have these huge corporations being run by these narcissistic egomaniacs for whom making money's not enough. They want to demonstrate to you their virtue, and they want to tell you how to think, as aristocrats always have. Aristocrats have always seen that as their place. You put this all together, and that's how you got this stew. But, and a few other elements, but this is what I have been screaming all this time. The backlash to this is not only going to wipe all this out, because you're never going to convince the majority of people that this is okay, and this is a future that they're willing to live in and to take their children into. You're going to set back the progress that was made by the good elements of the liberal universalist project. You're going to set it back 10, 20 years. We were in a place where a guy like Zuckerberg would never have gone out and been like, yeah, you know what we need? More masculine energy at the corporations. We're at a place by like the 90s where you never would have heard something like that without the benefit of a single DEI officer on the staff. Now you've gone all the way back. You've created such a backlash that you're going to see fucking madmen coming back without good scotch.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, my example was more specifically tech. I mean, obviously, Zuckerberg doesn't care about being seen as morally virtuous. I mean, he's willing to just, like, within weeks, book a trip to Mar-a-Lago and then go on Joe Rogan. Like, there's something fucked up about that guy. Like, there's something wrong with that guy. People call him a robot. You know, The Social Network, the movie, was a very dramatized version and stylized version of the creation of Facebook. Like, you look at Jesse Eisenberg's performance in that, it doesn't match with what you see, and it wasn't intended to. It's a very artistic and really fantastic movie, I think. But it does get to, there's something just does not click with that guy. Right. Like, that guy just it doesn't occur to him how shameless he looks within weeks going on Joe Rogan and be like, there seems to be a cultural shift, and I think men are being undermined in the workplace. Like, just to just like say that all of a sudden after years, like, but that personality type is the norm in tech. It's not the exception. Look at Elon. Elon voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Right. Elon made a bet that his path to the kind of deregulation he wanted was he sensed that there was momentum building in sort of anti-woke sort of cultural circles. He said, that's my Trojan horse to deregulate
Sure.
the sectors that I'm in. Happens to be, and he picked that horse, and he won. He won, but he's the same kind of thing. I mean, he went from voting for Joe Biden to being Trump's top surrogate. They will do what they feel they have to do. They do not. There's something wrong with these people. They do not think and feel like the rest of us. They just don't.
Well, it's another example of how this was always a battle between different wings of the same aristocracy.
Right.
Because you have these people like Bob Iger, like Larry Fink, who are more, I think, what Caleb Maupin and others would call the Rockefeller wing of capital, who do see themselves as virtuous and enlightened. These are the ones who will donate the tampons so that in Minnesota they can have them in the boys' bathrooms in high school. And then, look, these guys like Elon, they want to be thought of as virtuous. They just have a different aesthetic in what they attach to that. Yes, we have to restore masculinity. We have to restore people's natural bodily fluids. They just latch on to a different ideology, but particularly after arguably decades of the Rockefeller regime, that was looking pretty good to a lot of people at this point.
Yes, indeed.
Please clap.